Welcome to today's deep dive, where we're going to be tackling anger.
Ooh, anger.
You know it all too well.
We all do.
And we're going to be specifically looking at it from a Buddhist perspective.
Okay,
And you've shared some really interesting source material with me.
great.
There was this one idea that I have to say really kind of struck me.
Okay.
And that's the idea that holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die.
Yeah, that's such a powerful image.
Yeah.
It gets right to the heart of why Buddhism considers anger to be one of the three poisons,
Okay, so we've got these three poisons.
along with greed and ignorance.
But what makes anger so toxic in this context?
We know it is a pretty natural human emotion,
Yeah.
but Buddhism suggests that anger often stems from a kind of misperception of reality.
Okay.
We cling to this idea of a fixed self that feels threatened,
Okay.
and when we grasp really tightly to desires,
Mm-hmm.
we kind of set ourselves up for anger when those desires are thwarted.
Yeah, so it's all about how we're perceiving the situation and ourselves within it. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And there's this other quote that I read that really resonated with me too.
Mm-hmm.
Something about holding on to anger
Yeah.
being like grasping a hot coal.
Yes, that's a classic analogy from the Dhammapada,
Okay.
a collection of the Buddha's sayings.
Right.
It highlights how self-destructive anger can be.
Mm.
We might think we're harming the other person, but ultimately we're the ones getting burned.
Yeah, it's almost like we become a prisoner of our own anger then.
Exactly. And the consequences of not addressing that anger can be pretty significant.
Okay.
Buddhist teachings talk about anger being a path to hell, alongside things like lust and greed.
Wow. Okay.
It's seen as a force that leads to suffering for both ourselves and others.
Yeah, it reminds me of that saying about holding on to anger being like punishing yourself for someone else's mistakes.
Right.
But you know what I'm curious about?
Yeah.
What about righteous anger?
Yeah.
Is there a place for that? How does Buddhism kind of reconcile that idea? That's a great question. Buddhism acknowledges that there are times when anger can be a motivating force for positive change.
Okay.
However, the key lies in differentiating between anger that arises from ego and attachment and anger that stems from a genuine desire for justice and well-being.
So it's about the motivation behind the anger,
Precisely.
the root of it.
Yeah, and this brings us back to that poison analogy.
Yeah.
Why is holding on to anger seen as so harmful?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the Dhammapada explains that anger ultimately harms the individual, harboring it more than anyone else.
Okay.
It's not about letting the other person off the hook.
Right.
It's about recognizing that holding on to anger is like drinking poison ourselves and expecting the other person to die.
We're the ones that suffer the consequences.
Exactly, and those consequences can manifest in various ways.
Okay.
You mentioned stress earlier,
Yeah.
and prolonged anger can lead to chronic stress,
Right.
which has a whole cascade of negative effects on both our mental and physical well-being.
Okay.
When you're constantly angry, your body is in this heightened state of alert, releasing stress hormones like cortisol.
Right.
Over time, this can contribute to things like high blood pressure, heart disease, and even a weakened immune system.
So anger really does have a physiological impact.
It does.
It's pretty alarming.
It is. And then there's also the social aspect to consider.
Okay.
Anger can push people away,
Yeah.
leading to feelings of isolation and loneliness.
Right.
It can damage relationships and create a cycle of negativity that's really hard to break free from.
It's interesting because we often think of anger as this outward expression,
Mhm.
but it sounds like it can be just as damaging internally.
Absolutely. And then, of course, there's the regret
Yeah.
that often comes with clinging to anger.
Right.
We might act impulsively in the heat of the moment, saying or doing things we later regret.
Right.
Or we might spend years harboring resentment,
Yeah.
only to realize later that it's robbed us of joy and peace.
Speaking of choosing a different path,
Yeah,
the story of Nelson Mandela really exemplifies this, when you say.
he does.
I mean, he experienced immense anger and injustice,
he did.
and yet ultimately chose a different route.
Yes. Nelson Mandela, or Madiba, as he was affectionately known,
Okay.
is a powerful example of the transformative power of forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
He spent 27 years in prison for his activism against apartheid in South Africa.
Right.
I mean, the anger and resentment he must have felt is almost unimaginable.
Hard to even fathom.
Yeah, and yet he emerged from prison not consumed by bitterness, but with this message of reconciliation and forgiveness.
Yeah.
His story truly embodies that core message of letting go,
Okay.
that it's a path to healing and moving forward.
Right.
Doesn't mean condoning what happened or forgetting the pain.
Right.
It's about choosing to release the grip of anger and create space for something new.
It's like he understood that holding on to that anger would only keep him imprisoned in a different way.
Exactly. And that's a lesson we can all apply to our own lives.
Mm-hmm.
Letting go of anger is a process. It's not always easy,
Right.
but it's a choice we can make for our own well-being.
So if we're ready to kind of embark on that journey of letting go,
Yeah.
what are some practical steps that we can take to manage and release that anger? And I'm particularly interested in how mindfulness comes into play here.
Mindfulness is a powerful tool.
Okay.
It's about cultivating awareness of our thoughts, feelings, and sensations in the present moment without judgment.
Okay.
So instead of getting swept away by anger,
Mm-hmm.
we create space to observe it, understand it, and choose how to respond.
So instead of being controlled by the anger, we're kind of taking back the reins.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, so what are some specific mindfulness techniques that we can utilize in those heated moments?
Well, deep breathing exercises can be surprisingly effective.
Okay.
They help to calm the nervous system and create a sense of relaxation.
Yeah, I've definitely noticed that when I'm feeling overwhelmed, just taking a few deep breaths can make a difference.
It can be very grounding. Another helpful technique is body scan meditation.
Okay.
This involves bringing awareness to different parts of your body, noticing any sensations without trying to change them.
Mm-hmm.
It helps us become more attuned to our physical experience.
Okay.
It can be a powerful way to process emotions like anger.
Right. And then there's mindful walking, which I've heard can be really helpful when you're feeling emotionally charged.
Yes, mindful walking is a wonderful way to connect with the present moment
Okay.
and allow emotions to move through you.
Mm-hmm.
It's about paying attention to the sensations of your feet on the ground, the movement of your body, and the sights and sounds around you.
Right.
It's a simple practice,
Yeah.
but it can be incredibly helpful in shifting your state of mind.
It seems like all of these mindfulness practices are about creating space
Yes.
between the trigger and our reaction,
Yeah.
giving us a chance to choose a more skillful response.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
It's not about suppressing anger,
Right.
but rather about transforming how we relate to it.
While mindfulness helps us create that space, I'm curious about how we cultivate patience,
Yeah.
especially in those moments when anger feels so immediate.
Patience is crucial,
Yeah.
and the sources offer some valuable guidance.
Okay.
One suggestion is to set intentions.
Okay.
Before entering a situation that you anticipate might be stressful,
Mm-hmm.
take a moment to set an intention to remain calm and patient.
Right.
It's like planting a seed in your mind, reminding yourself of how you want to respond.
It's like giving yourself a roadmap for navigating those tricky moments.
Exactly.
What other techniques can help us cultivate patience?
Another helpful practice is using positive affirmations,
Okay.
reminding yourself of the benefits of patience, how it can help you make better decisions, strengthen relationships, and cultivate inner peace. Can shift your internal dialogue from, I can't stand this, to, I can handle this with patience and grace.
It's that shift in perspective
Yeah.
that can be so powerful. I'm also intrigued by this idea of reflective journaling for cultivating patience. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Absolutely. Taking some time each day to write about your experiences,
Okay.
particularly any situations that triggered anger or impatience,
Yeah.
can be incredibly insightful.
Okay.
Reflect on what happened, how you felt,
Yeah.
and what you might do differently next time.
Mm-hmm.
It's about turning those challenging experiences into opportunities for learning and growth.
So we're not just reacting to these situations, we're actively engaging with them and learning from them.
Precisely. And as you continue to practice mindfulness and patience, you'll start to notice a shift in how you respond to anger.
Okay.
You'll have more space to make conscious choices rather than reacting automatically.
This brings us to a crucial question then.
Okay.
How do we actually let go of anger once and for all?
Yeah.
Because as we've discussed, holding on to it only harms us.
Right.
Is there a specific formula for letting go?
You know, there's no magic formula,
Oh.
but there are some key principles and practices that can guide us.
Okay.
The first step is self-reflection.
Okay.
Take some time to really explore the roots of your anger.
Mm-hmm.
What are the underlying beliefs, fears, or unmet needs that are fueling it?
So it's about getting curious about our anger rather than just trying to shove it down or ignore it.
Exactly.
Okay, so we're not trying to erase the anger, we're
Right.
trying to understand it.
Exactly. And as you start to understand the deeper layers of your anger, you can begin to address those underlying issues.
Okay.
Sometimes simply acknowledging the pain or hurt that's driving the anger can be incredibly healing.
So we've done the inner work.
Yeah.
We're understanding the roots of our anger. What comes next?
Thought.
How do we actually start to let go?
Well, the source material suggests that one powerful practice is engaging in compassionate actions towards those who have provoked anger.
That seems a bit counterintuitive.
It can.
Why would we show kindness to someone who has hurt us?
It's not about condoning their behavior,
Okay.
but rather about shifting our own energy.
Okay.
When we hold on to anger and resentment, we're giving that person power over our emotional state. But when we choose to act with compassion, even in small ways, we're taking back our power.
It's about breaking that cycle of negativity
Exactly.
and choosing a different path.
Exactly. And it can have a ripple effect.
Okay.
When we act with kindness, it can sometimes soften the other person's heart as well. But even if it doesn't,
Yeah.
we've still made a choice to align ourselves with love rather than anger.
So we're not doing it for them.
Right.
We're doing it for ourselves.
Precisely. And then, of course, there's the role of meditation, which we touched on earlier.
Right.
Regular meditation practice can be incredibly helpful in developing emotional regulation skills and cultivating inner peace.
Yeah. I can see how quieting the mind
Yeah.
could be so essential for letting go of those repetitive thought patterns that keep anger alive. What role does forgiveness play in all of this? It's mentioned quite a bit in the source material.
Forgiveness is often seen as a key component of letting go of anger.
Okay.
It's about releasing the grip of resentment and choosing to move forward without the burden of the past.
Okay.
But it's important to remember that forgiveness is not about condoning what happened or pretending that what happened didn't hurt.
So we're not saying it was okay,
Right.
but we're choosing to let go of the anger.
Yes. It's about releasing the grip that anger and resentment have on us.
Okay.
Forgiveness is about acknowledging the pain, allowing ourselves to feel it fully, and then choosing to let go of the bitterness and resentment.
Okay.
It's a process that takes time and courage,
Right.
and it's not always easy.
So it's not about suppressing or denying our anger.
Right.
It's about transforming it.
Exactly. And it's important to note that forgiveness is not a one-time event.
Yeah.
It's often an ongoing process.
Right.
There may be times when the anger or hurt resurfaces,
Yeah.
and that's okay.
Yeah.
The key is to keep practicing forgiveness. Keep choosing to let go until eventually those negative emotions lose their grip on us.
That's a really important point.
Yeah.
It's not a switch we flip.
Right.
It's a journey.
It is.
And speaking of journeys, I'm curious about how the Buddhist concept of karma relates to forgiveness.
Karma in Buddhist thought is this complex principle of cause and effect.
Okay.
It suggests that every action, thought, and intention creates a ripple effect,
Okay.
shaping our future experiences.
Right.
When we act from anger, we're planting seeds of suffering. But when we choose to forgive, we're breaking that cycle and creating the conditions for healing and peace.
So forgiveness is not just about the other person. It's about our own well-being.
Exactly.
It's like choosing to unlock the chains that are holding us back.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that forgiveness is a gift we give to ourselves. It's about freeing ourselves from the burden of the past
Right.
so we can move forward with greater peace and joy.
That's a powerful way to think about it.
It is.
And speaking of powerful thoughts,
Yeah.
here's a question I want to pose to our listener today.
Yeah.
Think about a time when you felt intense anger towards someone.
Mm-hmm.
What would it look like to practice forgiveness in that situation?
Mm-hmm.
How might it shift your experience of the situation and your own emotional well-being?
That's an excellent question for reflection.
Yeah.
And we'll delve deeper into this concept of forgiveness as we continue our deep dive into anger and letting go. It's interesting you bring up karma, because forgiveness is often misunderstood. It's not about saying what someone did was okay or, just brushing the hurt under the rug. It's more about releasing the grip that those negative feelings have on us.
Yeah, I think that's where people get tripped up. It's like, if I forgive, am I letting the other person off the hook?
Right.
But you're saying it's more about freeing ourselves from that burden.
Yes, exactly. Forgiveness acknowledges the pain, allows us to feel it fully. And then this is key. We choose to let go of the bitterness and resentment. That takes real strength, and it's not a one-and-done deal.
Right. So there might be times when that anger resurfaces.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's normal.
It's an ongoing process.
Okay.
The key is to keep practicing, keep choosing to let go. Eventually, those negative emotions lose their hold on us.
That's encouraging. It's not about achieving some perfect state of never feeling anger again,
Right.
but about learning to respond differently.
Right, and that brings us back to karma. When we cling to anger and resentment, we're creating negative karma, as essentially perpetuating a cycle of suffering. But when we choose to forgive, we break that cycle and open ourselves up to healing and peace.
So forgiveness isn't just about the other person, it's about our own well-being, too.
Exactly. It's a gift we give to ourselves. It's about recognizing that holding on to anger is like carrying a heavy weight. It slows us down and keeps us from experiencing the fullness of life.
That's such a powerful visual. It's like we're choosing to unlock the chains that are holding us back, and there's no one right way to do it, is there?
No, not at all. There are many paths to forgiveness. What matters most is finding what resonates with you and allows you to release that grip of anger and resentment.
So for someone who's struggling with forgiveness, where do they even begin?
Start by being kind to yourself.
Yeah.
Forgiveness takes time. Don't expect it to happen overnight. Acknowledge the pain and hurt you're feeling. Allow yourself to feel those emotions fully without judgment.
So giving ourselves permission to grieve the hurt we've experienced.
Yes. And as you process those emotions, explore those practices we talked about earlier, like mindfulness and meditation. These practices can help you create space between your emotions and your reactions, allowing you to observe your anger without getting swept away by it.
It's like hitting that pause button, giving ourselves that space for conscious choice.
Precisely. And as you continue to practice, you may find that the intensity of your anger begins to lessen. You may start to see the situation from a different perspective, with more understanding and compassion.
It's like we're shifting our focus from blame and resentment to understanding and empathy. Does that make forgiveness easier?
It can. As that shift occurs, forgiveness becomes more accessible. You may find that you're able to let go of the need to punish the other person or hold on to the hurt. You may even begin to feel a sense of compassion for them, recognizing that they too are likely acting from a place of pain or suffering.
That's a big realization that even those who hurt us are often hurting themselves.
It is. And as you cultivate compassion both for yourself and for the other person, forgiveness becomes a natural outgrowth of that understanding.
Yeah.
It's not something you force in prior order, arises organically from a place of love and wisdom.
This has been such a rich and insightful conversation. As we wrap up this section on forgiveness, I want to leave our listeners with a final thought to ponder. What if forgiveness is not just about letting go of the past, but also about creating a more peaceful and loving present?
That's a beautiful question, and I encourage everyone to contemplate how that shift in perspective might change how we approach forgiveness in our own lives. Remember, forgiveness is not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength. It's a choice that liberates us from the chains of the past and allows us to create a brighter future both for ourselves and for the world around us.
I love that. And it makes me think about some of the other letting go techniques mentioned in the source material, things beyond forgiveness. For instance, there's this idea of directly addressing the harm that was caused.
Right. Taking responsibility where appropriate. Sometimes letting go of anger involves making amends, acknowledging our part in the situation, even if it feels uncomfortable. It's a way of restoring balance and moving forward with integrity.
And I imagine that can be really difficult, especially if we feel justified in our anger.
It can be challenging, but ultimately it's about shifting from a mindset of blame to a mindset of accountability. It's about recognizing that even if we didn't intend to cause harm, our actions may have had negative consequences.
So it's not about dwelling on the past or getting stuck in guilt, but about acknowledging our role and taking steps to make things right.
Exactly. And that might involve apologizing, offering restitution, or simply changing our behavior in the future.
It's about moving from words to actions, demonstrating our commitment to positive change.
Precisely. And when we take those steps, we often experience a sense of release, a feeling of lightness that comes from aligning our actions with our values.
It's like we're freeing ourselves from the weight of that unresolved conflict.
Yes. And this process of making amends is often intertwined with another important letting go technique, setting boundaries.
That's an interesting connection. How do boundaries play into letting go of anger?
Well, sometimes anger arises from feeling violated or disrespected. Setting clear boundaries is a way of protecting ourselves and preventing future hurt. It's about communicating our needs and limits assertively and taking action to enforce those boundaries when necessary.
So it's not about controlling the other person, but rather about taking control of our own well-being.
Exactly. And when we establish healthy boundaries, we create a sense of safety and space for ourselves, which can reduce the likelihood of anger arising in the first place.
It's like we're building a protective shield around ourselves, not to shut others out, but to create a safe space for healing and growth.
That's a great analogy. And sometimes setting boundaries might mean stepping away from a relationship or situation that is consistently causing harm.
Right. That can be a difficult decision.
It can be.
But sometimes it's necessary for our own well-being.
It is. And it's important to remember that setting boundaries is an act of self-love and self-respect. It's about prioritizing our own needs and creating a life that is aligned with our values.
It's about choosing ourselves even when it's hard. And alongside boundaries, the source material also highlights the importance of communication and letting go of anger.
Yes, open and honest communication is essential. Sometimes anger festers because we haven't fully expressed our feelings or needs. It's about finding healthy ways to communicate our anger assertively, but without aggression.
So it's not about bottling it up or exploding, but finding that middle ground where we can express ourselves authentically without causing harm. What are some ways to cultivate that kind of communication?
One technique is to use I statements, focusing on our own feelings and experiences, rather than blaming the other person. For example, instead of saying, "You made me angry," we might say, "I felt hurt and angry when you said that."
That's a subtle shift, but I can see how it would make a big difference in how the message is received.
It can. And it's also important to be mindful of our tone and body language. Even if our words are chosen carefully, if our tone is aggressive or our body language is threatening, the message will likely be received negatively.
So it's about being congruent in our communication, making sure our words, tone, and actions are all aligned.
Exactly. And remember, communication is a two-way street. It's not just about expressing our own feelings, but also about listening to and understanding the other person's perspective.
That can be challenging when we're feeling angry,
Yeah.
but it's so important for finding resolution. And sometimes, even with our best efforts at communication, letting go of anger might require seeking outside support.
Absolutely. Therapy can be an invaluable resource for exploring the roots of our anger, developing coping skills, and learning to communicate more effectively.
It's like having a trained guide to help us navigate those complex emotional landscapes.
Exactly. And there are also support groups specifically for anger management where we can connect with others who are going through similar challenges and learn from their experiences.
It's a reminder that we don't have to go through this alone. There are people and resources available to help us on our journey.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up this section on letting go techniques, it's important to emphasize that there's no one-size-fits-all approach. What works for one person may not work for another.
So it's about finding what resonates with us and creating a personalized toolkit for navigating anger.
Precisely. It's about experimenting with different techniques, being patient with ourselves, and celebrating the small victories along the way.
That's encouraging. It's not about achieving some perfect state of non-anger, but about continuously refining our ability to respond skillfully to challenging situations.
Exactly. And as we move toward a calmer and more balanced relationship with anger, we create space for greater peace, joy, and fulfillment in our lives.
And speaking of creating space, one of the techniques that really stood out to me in the source material was this idea of engaging in activities that promote emotional release.
Oh, yeah.
Can you talk a bit more about that?
Of course. Sometimes anger gets trapped inside us, building up pressure like a volcano ready to erupt. Engaging in activities that allow for healthy emotional release can be incredibly cathartic.
So it's about finding healthy outlets for that pent-up energy. What are some examples of these kinds of activities?
Well, physical exercise is a fantastic way to release tension and process emotions. Whether it's running, dancing, swimming, or practicing yoga, moving our bodies can help us shift our emotional state.
I can definitely relate to that. I always feel so much lighter after a good workout.
It can be transformative. And then there are creative outlets like painting, writing, playing music, or even gardening. Expressing ourselves creatively can be a powerful way to process emotions and release pent-up energy.
It's like we're channeling that anger into something beautiful and constructive.
Exactly. And even something as simple as spending time in nature can be incredibly soothing and grounding. The fresh air, the sounds of birds singing, the feeling of the sun on our skin, it can all help us to reconnect with a sense of peace and tranquility.
It's like nature has this innate ability to calm our minds and soothe our souls.
It does. And another technique that can be surprisingly effective is laughter. Watching a funny movie, spending time with loved ones who make us laugh, or simply finding humor in everyday situations can help us to shift our perspective and release tension.
It's like laughter is this antidote to anger, reminding us not to take ourselves too seriously.
It is. And sometimes just allowing ourselves to cry can be a powerful release. Tears can be a natural way of processing sadness, grief, or even anger.
It's like we're releasing that pent-up emotion, allowing it to flow through us and out of us.
Exactly. Yeah. It is important to remember that there's no right or wrong way to experience emotional release. What works for one person may not work for another. The key is to find what feels authentic and helpful for you.
It's about honoring our own unique needs and finding what brings us back to a sense of balance and peace.
Precisely. And as we cultivate these practices of emotional release, we create more space for joy, gratitude, and connection in our lives.
This has been such an enlightening conversation, and it feels like we've covered so much ground, from understanding the nature and impact of anger to exploring the many paths to letting go.
We have.
Yeah.
And as we move towards wrapping up our deep dive into anger and letting go, it feels important to circle back to the Buddhist teachings that have guided our exploration today.
You're right. We have covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. From those initial quotes that grabbed our attention to exploring this whole intricate web of anger's causes and consequences, it really feels like we've journeyed through a whole emotional landscape.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's so valuable about these Buddhist teachings. They offer this really comprehensive framework for understanding and navigating anger. Not as something to be feared,
Right.
but as a natural part of the human experience.
That's a key takeaway for me. It's not about becoming some perfectly serene being who never feels anger again.
Right.
It's about learning to relate to it differently.
Exactly. And the source material really emphasizes that skillful management of anger is a practice,
Okay.
a continuous process of learning and growth.
Okay.
We might not always get it right,
Right.
but each time we encounter anger, we have this opportunity to respond with greater awareness and wisdom.
So it's like we're building a muscle, that emotional intelligence muscle,
Yeah.
that helps us navigate those heated moments with more grace and composure.
Yeah.
But what I'm really grappling with is
Right.
this idea that anger is a path to hell. Is it really that serious?
Well, it's not about a literal hell, but rather the internal state of suffering that anger can create. When we're consumed by anger, we're cut off from our own innate wisdom and compassion.
Right.
We're more likely to act in ways that harm ourselves and others, perpetuating this cycle of negativity.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like anger creates this tunnel vision where we kind of lose sight of the bigger picture
Yeah,
and get trapped in that reactive state.
exactly.
Yeah.
And Buddhist teachings encourage us to approach anger with this sense of curiosity and compassion,
Okay.
both for ourselves and for others. So instead of judging ourselves harshly for feeling angry, we can ask ourselves, what is this anger trying to tell me? What unmet need or unresolved hurt is it pointing to?
It's like we're becoming an investigator of our own emotions then,
Yeah.
trying to understand the root cause
Exactly.
rather than just reacting to the surface symptoms.
Exactly. And as we cultivate this more mindful and compassionate approach, we naturally begin to make choices that are aligned with peace,
Okay.
both within ourselves and in the world around us.
So it's not just about personal growth, but also about creating a more peaceful and harmonious society.
Absolutely. And I think that's where the Buddhist emphasis on community really comes in.
Okay.
We don't have to go through this alone. Surrounding ourselves with supportive people who can offer guidance and encouragement can make a world of difference.
It's like having a network of fellow travelers to help us navigate those inevitable bumps in the road.
Exactly. And there are so many wonderful teachers and resources available to support us on this path.
Right.
Whether it's through meditation groups, books, or online communities, there's this wealth of wisdom and support out there.
This has been such a rich and insightful conversation. It feels like we've peeled back the layers of anger,
Yeah.
exploring its complexities and nuances in a way that I never have before. As we wrap up our deep dive, what final thought would you leave our listener with?
I would just encourage you to remember that you have the power to choose peace both within yourself and in the world around you. Cultivate that peace through mindfulness, compassion, and those practices we've explored today. As you do, you'll find that anger no longer have that power to control you. Instead, it becomes an opportunity for growth, a stepping stone on the path to greater wisdom and compassion.
That's a beautiful message to end on. Thank you so much for guiding us through this deep dive into anger and letting go. I have a feeling this is just the beginning of a lifelong journey of exploration for our listeners and for all of us.
It is. And remember, the journey itself is the destination. Every step we take towards greater understanding and compassion is a step towards a more peaceful and fulfilling life.